So, has anyone got anything they want to share or testify or ask?
I've got a list, so I'll let other people go first. This is your chance, Mike. This is your chance, Henry.
Well, no one's going, so.
Okay.
Come on.
Okay, so Mike,
Yeah.
I'm got questions about the chancellor's houses. How do they work with us? How do they work together amongst themselves? And how do the chancellor's houses, how do they interact with the Galactic 70?
Okay. Anyone else want to ask a question? Okay. Well, I can share a little bit in terms of my personal experience of it. A lot of my encounters in those chancellors' houses. I didn't engage them until Wisdom gave me a chancellor's seal and opened the avenue for it. It wasn't something I could do before that point. So I'm not sure what level of governmental authority people need before they can access that. I don't know. I just know what I've experienced. And I had a couple of encounters in some of the houses out of sequence, just as a forerunner experience, which were quite interesting experiences. I didn't know where they were at that point in time. And then when Wisdom took me to all 12 houses and introduced me to the 12 chief chancellors, then God spoke to me and said, you need to go through them in sequence, and you need to understand how they work, how they align. And I didn't have any idea. And I went into the first house, and it was just so overwhelming that I just wrote down a whole load of things without thinking about it that I sort of experienced, and it didn't make any sense. It was just an overwhelming experience of the very nature of God, really, but expressed in things that were in this house, or in the dimension of the house, because it was a dimensional thing. It's like you go through into this door, and it's like the Doctor Who's TARDIS. It's this thing opens up, and it's this realm. And so I wrote it down and didn't try and analyze it. I just wrote it down, and then I moved on to the next house, and then to the next, and once I moved on to 3 houses, and I'd been in each of the first 3 houses, then I began to understand that they work together as a 3, and that was my first thing. Okay, this is how these function. They need to be aligned together as a 3, and then they open up the next 3. So they were arranged in 4 groups of 3. And when the first 3 were aligned, then the first of the next group became the 4th, which was a window, open up the window for that to manifest, and that's how they worked. And I'm sort of working on trying to produce that diagrammatically so that people can see it, but I'm sort of, it's not high on my agenda at the minute. So I've now and again sort of look into it, and then I found that then the next 3 opened, and then the next 3 worked together. Then they opened the next one, so they all had to be aligned. And God described it as the circle of the deep. And I know I don't, because a lot of these things, a lot of people look at them as the Mazzaroth, or the signs of the zodiac, or the heavenly signs. I think there's something which is part of that, in the sense there are 12 houses, and those 12 houses are aligned, and they are moving. They're not static, and they can be moved around in a sense dimensionally, but I don't see them as stars as such, as more as, you know, places of governmental authority. But they do need alignment, and they do need to function together. And eventually, you know, I went into all of the houses and began to see how they work together in producing legislation, and that really was key in then engaging with the Court of 70 and producing a court case, because the first three houses were key in understanding how to present a case. You know, that's what I learned in it. Now, the more I meditated on it, I didn't want to go back. I didn't felt kept to going back into the place, but I began to meditate on what I'd experienced. That meditation brought an understanding of how they worked. So, you know, the first three were precepts, statutes, and laws, then ordinances, mantles, and weapons, and then scrolls, discovery and commissioning, and then culture, affairs of the nations, and treasury. Now, I understand what they are, and I understand that they go way beyond what we're just called to do now. So they are primarily, my interest in it was to understand how that would bring legislation into our present time, so that we can begin to administrate the order of Melchizedek and the Joshua generation and stuff. But my experiences in there were so beyond that I know that they are for more than just this time. You know, the affairs of the nations are not just about the nations on this earth. You know, it goes way beyond that. You know, affecting culture is not just about the culture of this earth. You know, so what we will be doing in what we would call the age to come, when we're engaging outside of time, when the time is no more, they have significance in all that. And there are things that are going on right now that were affected by the first three coming into alignment. And when the ordinances began to be released and the angelic hosts started to be aligned and God's purposes began to be outworked in raising up the Joshua generation of those sorts of things, it then began to trigger the next thing, the mantle house. And the mantle house is open right now, and there are new mantles. You know, there's legions of angels with new mantles ready to release them, because there is greater grace available, and you know, those mantles are the enabling power of God to fulfill his purpose. So as people get called into different levels of government, they get new mantles, and those new mantles are effectively being released right now as people begin to take their place. And so, you know, even initially when people start to engage their own mountains, they get a mountain, they get a mantle of authority for that mountain. When they begin to operate in a level of kingship, there's a new mantle of authority. And what I've sort of discovered, that there's a whole load of different mantles, you know, like legislator and oracle and scribe and chancellor and magistrate and judge, and there's all sorts of different mantles for different roles that effectively are involved with this circle of the deep and how the dimensions are aligned to bring order. It's all about kingdom order, and you can align this with the Metatron's cube and the different spheres of government. They're all linked together. You know, they're not independent of that. It's just how you perceive it and how you can engage it to have a working understanding of it. And I found that when I was asked to engage the Court of 70 and to produce, you know, this court case, I needed to understand the first three houses and how they work together in what was, what is, and what will be. so that I could begin to produce a case based on the precepts of God and the statutes of God and the laws of God. And I know I'm sort of waffling a little bit because I find it quite hard to describe it, but I understand now, that things are changing. Now, a lot of people talk about the Maseroth and the houses as if they are fixed and we're just subject to them like fate. It's like, and I've heard people even teach recently that, the House of Aries, that came, and then the House of Aquarius, and now we're going to have to wait another, I don't know, 2,000 years for the next house to come. These are subject to us. The alignment and the order and the government is subject to us as sons of God. It's our responsibility to bring order into this and to align it. We're not subject to it. It's not like some cosmic clock that is going and we just fit into the pattern. Because I know, some of the people were teaching, well, we've got another 50,000 years of this, and it's just like, to me, that it can be as dangerous as saying we've got no time at all. You can the whole sort of rapture theology type thing of we're going to be rescued, so there's no point investing in the future. Is to me an enemy ploy to get us to stop passing to the next generation, because what's the point, because there won't be any generations. If you suddenly sort of start saying, well, there's going to be 50,000 years in this next thing, it demotivates you. Well, okay, 50,000 years, what have I got to play in that? So I think there's a danger in just seeing it as this cosmic clock that we just fit into. God is calling us to align these houses, to bring what was into what is, and then to begin to declare and change what will be to get God's kingdom purposes in line.
So we take part in aligning them?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to understand how they work and call them into alignment for specific purposes. It's not just okay, now they're in alignment, so everything just works. They are aligned for specific mandates and purposes. So when I was looking at the Joshua generation and the old order and new order, and looking at this court case in terms of judgment and justice and grace and mercy, I looked at it from what was God's original perspective in the precepts of God, in the very nature of who he is, that then enabled me to make a case that says what we have now operating is not in accordance with what God's original purpose was, and therefore we can change that. So then you look at the evidence of what exists right now, measure it up, does it align? No. Now I can start to, because now I have a judgment. This does not align. Therefore the judgment is, this does not look like God's purpose. So now I can change that purpose by aligning things and therefore bringing the future into order. That's our responsibility as sons. God gave this universe to us. He gave the created order to us as his children to administrate. And actually our spirits as light and stars, if you like, had a role in the order of things. So when it comes to the stars, it's not like, okay, here's the sign of the zodiac and we all got to fit into it. Actually, we are supposed to be the governors, the signs, the stars that bring order, because that is where our light shines and we start to bring order into things. But, I'm sort of reticent to teach too much about it, because I don't want to teach it until I've got a full working model of understanding for myself. I've worked, having been in all the houses, there's more that I don't understand than I do. My spirit understands a lot more than my mind, and I'm letting my spirit really set the pace on how I release this or how I bring it. I've been working at it for the last 18 months, really, or more now, and because not many people are in a position of legislating, and they're still just getting their own mountains and whatever, you know, it may be it's not important for everyone to know, which is probably why I'll start doing it in the legislative groups that I'm doing and things like that before I release it just out there, because otherwise people will start trying to do stuff that they're not actually authorized or in a position to do. You know, I had no access to any of this until I was given a Chancellor's seal. Now, I don't know whether that's the case for everyone, but I know God wants more and more chancellors. He wants people sitting in the House of Chancellors, in the Court of Chancellors, legislating on judicial things. That's us. You know, we are supposed to have charge of the courts. It's not just that we go to the courts and we can present things to the court. Actually, we're supposed to be having charge of the courts and operating, functioning the courts. That's why some of these mantles are being prepared to release people to operate in magistrates' roles and judges' roles and chancellors' roles, because that's our role. That's what we've always been called to do. If Adam hadn't have messed it all up, the atmosphere of the earth would be where all this stuff was being outworked. You know, the hierarchy of the demonic things in the atmosphere of the earth is just a counterfeit of what Adam functioned with, the true angelic hosts and alignments that were operating in the atmosphere of the earth before he fell. That's what would have enabled him to administrate the whole earth through that atmospheric realm. So there's a lot that we have to start to understand and bring back into order. But you know, I'm sort of, you know, it's still on my agenda, but you know, I think it's probably going to come out through the legislative things that I'm doing rather than just generally. I'm going to just teach it, because I think it can be confusing and it could easily, you know, I don't want people just to be curious about stuff and just for the sake of it. It's got to be, okay, are you mandated, are you authorized, have you been called to access these realms? And then when you have, then you'll learn. I mean I'm really excited about administrating mercy. You know, I've got until beginning of November to prepare this case for mercy, because that's very much, you know, people will look at some of these names. You know, the Mantle House is very much to do with grace. It's very much to do with increase in authority and the divine ability of God to actually do things for him in the kingdom. The Weapons House is to do with mercy. Now, people will look at weapons and think, "Whoa, we're gonna bash the enemy up." It's not about. It's not really. That's not what it means. So when mercy, I mean, there are love bombs in that Weapons House. So all I can describe them of is love bombs, and there are thunderbolts of grace and mercy, you know, and peace. And there's things in there which, when they're released onto the earth, are going to be places which draw people into salvation, which will be part of the harvest, part of cities of refuge. You know, so you know, these things are now being in order. You know, that's being prepared. You know, that Weapons House is being prepared, and there are weapons being prepared. So when we start to administrate mercy, you know, out of the right place, then we'll start to see amazing things take place. You know, and then the next set of three will start to function: the scrolls and the discovery and the commissioning. You know, and that again, you know, has a whole different dimension and function to what that's about. You know, the Discovery House, there are things in the Discovery House which are the mysteries hidden in darkness. You know, there are things that I saw which I cannot describe, which are inventions and discoveries which are designed for us to use. And I can't describe them. It's frustrating in one sense, because I've seen them. There are power sources, there are new energy sources, there are new things that have never yet been seen on the earth, which are going to come out when that house is open. But that's not going to be open until the other things are in alignment, and until it's aligned. And even then, my role in it is just one specific area. And that's all I understand, that one specific area. There may be people doing things in these houses in 100 different areas, which I have no knowledge of, but because I'm not called to do it. So my own personal testimony is to what I've been called to do. And I believe that there are so many alignments of these things to bring all those things that God has planned and purposed for his people into being. And there may be people who are operating in the affairs of the nation's house now when I'm not even touching that. Although I've been there and I have seen a lot of activity, and I know some of the things in there about the 9 thrones for the tectonic plates of the earth and controlling the plates and bringing the earth back into original formation. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in there, you know, which in one sense is really interesting and exciting and amazing, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. You know, I don't know what I'm going to be doing after I've done this case for mercy, because I know once I finish that case, hey, they all, a whole galactic council, go into rest for whatever the days are. So it's like, you know, but I don't think God is just going to say, well, hey, rest for the next 200 days or whatever, you know. So, you know, I'm sure there are other things that he's got planned, which I will need probably to engage in some of those other houses in other ways, you know. But I'm really stirred to the whole thing of legislation and helping people, you know, come into places of legislation. You know, the sort of legislative groups that I've been doing are very much more practical and experiential in terms of teaching and then releasing that teaching rather than just answering questions, because they are much more of an agenda that God has set, which I'm looking to try and help people, you know, begin to get into their legislative places.
Oh, if it's okay, I'm going to ask for more help. So I was with Melchizedek, and he gave me, went into his treasury room, he had this index, he gave me an index card with the coordinates on it. And then he said, go see Wisdom. Okay. So I sat with Wisdom what seemed like a few days, just, you know, with this index card. And then all of a sudden I could see, I'd been to one, but all of a sudden I saw all 12. They showed up and they were connected with the Galactic Council. And I just looked at them for a while and I said, okay. And I knew that the index card had a coordinates on it, just like a book, you know. It has coordinates to go get something. And Melchizedek asked me to go get something, so I was on a quest. This took about 2.5 weeks because you're just like, okay, I'm going somewhere and I have no idea.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you know, I'm just hanging out with Wisdom, because who else do you hang out with, and having communion with her, and it's lovely. And all of a sudden, in my house, on my mantle, the white fireplace there in the living room, all of a sudden there came a red cord with these 4 cards attached to it, and they each had a letter on it. And I just went, okay, and it was just like I could have picked it up and said, here, do you see this? It was just so alive. And so I said, what do these letters mean? And so finally I figured out they were actually Hebrew and everything, and they were part of the coordinates. So that day I went, and finally I sensed that I could go into one of the houses, and she took me, and I walked into, and it was Discovery. And there's not a door. There's not a door. And so when I went in there, I wasn't in there very long, and now I'm just sharing this because I need some help.
Yeah.
So I need some help. So I have this index card, and the guy comes up to me, and it was Elijah, and I'd never met him before. And so I handed it, he goes, oh, come here, we're walking through, and you're trying to see everything while you're walking through, and he goes upstairs and up these stairs and puts his hand in this you expect to see books in the natural. You go, I have an index card. It's going to be some kind of book. It looks like a scroll or something. And he just puts his hand in the wall, and the coordinates of my card, like, you know, doing that, like the Apple Pay, you know, zing, zing. It was like the Apple Pay, and he reached through and he brought this huge book and he handed it to me and put it in my backpack. And he says, here you go. And before I left there, I just was kept thinking, it was, what were these coordinates that were on in my house? And I asked him if I could I put my hand in him, touch him. And when I put my hand in his heart, all of a sudden I knew that those 4 coordinates that were on my house were his 4 chambers of his heart, or his frequency, so to speak. So it's kind of like his calling card for his frequency. It was amazing, and it rocked my world. It's just like, it rocked my world. Because the letters, you know, that was who he was. So I went back, and I was kind of blown away for a few days. And I tried to figure out, why would Elijah and Melchizedek, why, you know, why from one to the other, why? And I have this, here I am, I have this book. Oh, and I agree with you. I saw a bunch of angels walking behind me on the sea of glass with all these mantles over their arms. Gajillions of them.
Mm.
And so I have this book in my backpack that it took me a few days, haven't opened it, and I took it back to Melchizedek. And so my natural self is looking and go, well, where did Melchizedek and Elijah connect? And they connected in Isaiah and in Malachi, and when they were talking about the fathers returning to the sons, that's where they've connected. So I'm just a little bit, and you talk about the legislation, this book on my back that I've given back to him, and he doesn't tell me to go, okay, thank you, go away now. No, then I'm part of it. So it's kind of overwhelming.
I know exactly how you feel. I felt overwhelmed for about 9 months with this stuff, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about it, because it was like, but the more I meditated on it, the more I began to have a working understanding, and the more I began to use that, and then I began to legislate the alignment of it for what I was called to do. And that's the key. You know, what is the book? If it's to do with fatherhood and sonship and whatever, is going to be a specific task to bring what was into what is, and then to see what will be changed in that area. And that's what we have to discover. What are the specific areas, mandates that we're authorized to operate in? And you know, and that's the important thing. It's not, oh well, I need to understand this out of a logical curiosity. It's, no, I need to understand it because I have a part to play in it, and that's all I'm responsible for, that part. So if there is something specific in this area, then that's what, in the meditation around it, that will be what comes out.
Okay.
That's what I discovered. For me, it was a court case. I am called to administrate this court case against the old order to bring the new order into its position. And that was, you know, that was a really heavy, in a sense, serious thing, you know, and I still see it as really, really serious. And all I've done is just start participating. And I'm sure there are so many other people who've been involved in this process, doing their bit, being obedient in the things that they've had revelation of, and it all starts to fit together in this sort of pattern of government that God is establishing. And so my encouragement would be, yeah, just continue to meditate over the book, over the issue of what is it that I'm called to do, and then if it's specifically revealed to you, then you begin then to start to legislate that. You know, and I legislated by going back into what was. That's what I've learned to do. I go back into the heart of God where there is no sin, and I stand there and I look forward and I let my spirit just absorb the truth. I mean, I did this morning. It's like, I've been on holiday for 2 weeks, and God said you need to have a complete, total rest from all legislation for 2 weeks. He said, I don't want you to do anything for 2 weeks, which was really hard because I was like, I'm used to doing stuff every day. So for 2 weeks, it was like, no, have a complete rest. So this morning was the first sort of day that I came back, and I went back into what was for this whole case for mercy, and my whole spirit just expanded in an understanding of mercy from an eternal perspective, and in how that will change things in our in our time, if you like, in our place. So I just stood there. I just stood there, but my spirit, and I journal everything, so I just wrote it all out. I wrote out what I started to say, and I spoke basically, 2 A4 pages of declarations, completely just out of my spirit, because I was standing in what was, completely from that place. I had no, and for 2 weeks I'd done nothing. And so I had this hunger, I guess, and desire, and I stood there, and it was amazing. It just felt, because normally, it's like I really don't want to take 2 weeks out in the middle of preparing a case for mercy, but God knows what He's doing, and I got more in an hour than if I would have tried for 2 weeks, and it all just flowed and came because I stood in the right place. And that is what I feel each of these houses, they are an aligning of what is and what was and what will be. And you begin to draw, when they connect, those things together and outwork them. And it will be that we will eventually operate, affecting the culture of the places that we are authorized to administrate. We will actually change the culture, because we will start to control the atmosphere, and we will start to have angelic majesties and thrones and rulers and principalities operating in those areas on our behalf, over the spheres where we have the everlasting doors open, because we have to open the everlasting doors to release those things into the atmosphere and then onto the earth. And we're not gonna understand all this in a few minutes. I mean, it's going to take time, and I have so much more patience than I did a couple of years ago. Because if I had 12 houses, 2 or 3 years ago, if I was shown access to 12 houses, I would have been in those things all the time to find out everything I possibly could, because I would have needed to know. But actually, I only needed to go into one of them each time, and my spirit received all the revelation it needed, even though my mind was just like, whoa, I can't, how do I describe all this? And I've written it all down, but I only go back and meditate on what my spirit draws me to. And initially it was the first, 3 houses, and then the 4th, and now the next 2. So, I'm up now to 6, so I'm on number 6, working at what does this mean? How does this function? What does this mean in regards to grace and mercy? How is this going to affect the Joshua generation? How is it going to affect legislation and our understanding of what we do to bring God's purposes and alignment into place? How does it relate to God's original governmental purposes and the pattern of that in terms of the order of Melchizedek and Metatron's cube and all those type of things that I've had experience of, but I couldn't see how they related. Now I can start to see the pattern of the relationships. Now I'm sort of on a journey, and then I met Melchizedek a few weeks ago, and I avoid that guy. I mean, it's like, and so, and I met Enoch. I mean, Enoch is another one who's very key. Like Elijah and Enoch are very key in this whole process, because they are the ones who still have their physical bodies. I mean, also Moses, who got his body back. So they are very key, and they have a key role to play in understanding these things and being able to outwork. And every time I sort of engage them, it almost like, woo, just another thing opens up. So the last time I engaged, it was Enoch. Enoch said, okay, there's another quest, and you have to go beyond. And I'm thinking, I don't want to go beyond. I'm happy with where I am and looking into beyond and hoping to get some revelation of it. Now I've got to go beyond. And I'm like, well, what on earth is that? And because that's very cryptic stuff. I mean, some of this stuff is just, what does that mean? Well, I start meditating on what it means, and I found myself, one Sunday morning I was standing in worship and just engaged in the presence of God, and all of a sudden I find myself beyond. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? It's weird. I mean, some of it's just weird stuff. It feels weird. But there's a sense to it. There's something in it that my spirit just resonates with. It just feels, I've always known this, but now I'm actually functioning in something that I've always really known. So it's familiar, but really weird. And it's weird to my natural mind, if not to my spirit. But I'm not racing with it. I know there's time. We've got time to do whatever we need to do, as long as we're willing to continue to pursue and do what we're called to do individually. And then when we start to come together with others, then we'll find that we will have the different aspects of the things that will bring, again, 3, opening up a 4th for the window. So when benches of 3 form, you still need the 4th, which is why we've got to see the windows open, but you have to establish it in government first and then agreement to open the window. So all these sort of patterns begin to manifest, and you suddenly start to see how this is, in a sense, how God has aligned everything. Because that's when you go into those precepts and statutes and law houses, you realize this is how God has ordained everything to function. All those dimensional interactions and everything has always been God's purpose. And you're like, oh yeah, it feels like, oh yeah, why didn't I see that before? But of course you don't until you get there. And I know it does feel overwhelming. I sympathize with you because I felt very much the same way. But as I pursued it, it began to open up, and the revelation I needed for this time, I now have. Now I'm going to need more revelation for the next season, and then more revelation from the next. But it's all going to come out of the same basic principle. It's just going to go deeper or higher or wider or whatever way you want to look at it. There's just more. And I only need what I need now. But I will need more, in the next season and in the next and the next. So, it's taken me 2 years to get to now starting to engage the 6th house in bringing some alignment to it and starting to legislate it, which means I start decreeing it open, and I start to decree preparation, and those are some of the things I start to decree, and the angels start to respond. I mean, the angels are waiting for us to bring them into play in these things and get them operating in these areas on our behalf, So yeah. Yeah, I know. Probably not too much help, but I've decided not to try and describe what it's like in them, because I just get like, I can't. I just still don't have the full way of expressing it. I understand, when Paul said, things are inexpressible. It's not that I've not seen them, I just don't have the language to be able to express the meaning of what I've seen, other than just describing a whole series of pictures or scenes or things, you know. And actually what I see may well be different from what other people see, because I'm seeing what I need to see. You know, it's like the Matrix, you know, Neo going to see the Oracle. You only get to what you need to know, you know, and what I need to know may be different from what you need to know right now. But when you engage it, you will get to know what it is that you need to know, and then you'll start to function in it, and you'll use that revelation, and then you'll begin to legislate it, and that's what it's all about, you know. And some people, you know, we've been pushing into these things, and God is looking for willing people. You know, there's a whole load probably more qualified people than us out there, but they've not been so willing and persistent to keep going at it, you know, and not give up when we get overwhelmed and like, whoa, what is all this? But keep going, and God loves the desires of hearts that are pursuing Him, going deeper. You know, deep is still calling out to deep at the sound of that waterfall. I mean, it's still happening. And those who just didn't, you know, want to listen to the first call, you know, God is calling those who have deeper and deeper. You know, we just got to keep encouraging the others to listen to the call and to embrace where they are with it. You know, but there's a lot. You know, we're just scratching the surface. I mean, I think this is what I feel. You know, the more I engage, the more I realize I don't know, and the more I realize there is to know. You know, and then you began to put it into eternal perspective. That's really what you do. You know, time. You know, there is a limit to time, but there will be no limit to eternity, obviously. And so, but what we do in time is just preparing us for eternity. You know, we will continue to develop what we've done in time and expand it into a different dimension. You know, whether it's ruling galaxies or whatever it might be. You know, there is what we learn here, and everything functions like this. In every dimension God has created, it still functions according to the basic precepts of who God is, and His basic statutes, and how His laws, or how, you know, every dimension has laws. So they still come out of the house of laws, regardless of whether I understand them and experience them. They exist.
Right here.
You know,
So, do you know if Jessica's going to be home?
Okay. My husband going to work.
yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, anyone else got anything? Yeah. I mean, all that can seem just way out of perspective for a lot of people because they're just not there in that yet. But they will. You know, if people are willing to pursue and set the desires in their heart on God and what God's purposes are, you know, these things will start to unfold, and we'll start to realize, you know, our part to play in answering creation's groan and bringing order and bringing, you know, government and bringing legislation, you know, and having charge of the courts and administrating those things and being part of the assemblies of heaven. That's the decision-making processes of heaven. That's the thing. You know, little did I know when I first sat on a mountain and sat on a throne and started, you know, fiddling around with my own life, you know, where it would lead. You know, I had no idea, but because I've kept pursuing, it's just opened up and opened up and opened up. And God is just looking for willing people who will just start at the beginning and follow the journey, and it will just continue to open up. You know?
When I was
for those many days with wisdom.
Yeah.
Just do you think is that space?
Yeah. Yeah. But in a sense, what happens in that is you'll find that your spirit will start to do things. So it will start to take authority over light and creative and created light and gravity, and to shape those grids, because that's what we're called to do. You know, we're not just subject to it all. This is the thing that I'm discovering. We get a part to play because we get to stand in the decision-making assemblies of God and the councils of God, not just at courts, but in the councils of God, and we get assigned tasks. And some of those tasks will be to do things like changing the shape of a grid or of how that works. Now, you can think, well, do I understand it all? You don't have to understand it all. You just have to do it. That's what I found. You know, when Jesus said to me things like, release a blue light. I had no idea what that meant, other than, all right, I'll go and do it then. So how do I do it? Okay, I will say the words. I release a blue light that carries this call. That's all I did. I didn't need to understand the technicality behind it. I just had to be obedient, and then I started to see the results of this blue light, which, and I felt it go out from the crown that was on my head, but I didn't need to understand what nanometers was the wavelength of blue light. It obeyed me. When I was obedient to operating God's word, the word he had spoken to me, then everything obeyed that when I spoke it out. And it's the same thing with things like this. Well, we look at it and it's like, whoa, I don't understand. How could I bend light or straighten light? How could I affect space-time? How do I affect the law? If there's a law, can I manipulate that law and operate that law? What is the law that gives me the authority to operate it? What is a law? Because if it's a law, are there higher laws? Are there higher? We're in this dimension of time. There are higher dimensions of time, therefore higher laws. Therefore, we can effectively operate from a higher level, higher dimension to affect this dimension. All that stuff is like, yeah, I now understand that's what happens. I don't understand how it happens, but I don't have to. I just have to do my bit and hope other people are doing their bit, and we all suddenly start to find that these things start to come together. And I'm sure they are. I mean, I'm sure that's why we're in relationship with each other. I think that's why God has made these connections, because we have similar pathways and we may be intersecting on that path, or we may be walking parallel to each other or on the same path, but we're connected for a purpose. And you don't have to understand, but when your spirit says do something, you do it, and you find that these things will respond. Because I mean, I've seen those pictures. I know what sort of pictures you mean, And it's like some of them, they have these grids, and then you have this gravity, and the grid shapes in, black holes and different things, all that stuff, and it's like, okay, when God says do this, or when your spirit starts directing you to speak things into that, to direct it, that's all you do.
You didn't go get a mandate and have it sealed and go through all of that.
Well, that's what you do. You've
Yeah.
been given the mandate. You see, that's part of the process. You're given these things which mandates you to operate in them. That's why you have the revelation. That's why you've seen it. That's why you were given the coordinates. That's why you had the letters and you had the four chambers and those things, because that four chambers brings your heart and then changes you and then prepares you and then consummates it, and then you start functioning in it. That's what happens. Yeah. Well, that's what happens in the four chambers. It's like a marriage process, and it happens over and over again. We engage the garden of delight, the desires of our heart gets drawn, we then come onto the dance floor, which we step onto the black and white, mysteries into light, darkness into light, all things start to come around us. We then go into the soaking room where the frequencies and the things start to prepare us, and then we consummate it and we start to outwork it. That process goes on all the time. That's what maturity is. And when we're faithful with little, we get to do more. And we go through the same process. Most people don't realize that that's the process, but that's what's happening. The desires of your heart are captured. And it's like, it's like that Lakash, look into the eyes of God, and it's like, whoa, I'm in love. And it's like, I'm in love with God, but actually now I'm in love with this thing that he's put on my heart. So I have a desire, a love for it that will cause me to sacrifice to it and pursue it. And then when I then engage it, I go on the dance floor and I'm dancing with him with this concept around me and the revelation of that and his DNA and the frequency all around me. And all of a sudden, I'm stepping in and out of revelation, bringing from darkness into light, and I then take that, and then God prepares me, because now I've got this revelation that I'm ill-equipped to be able to use. So I now need to be transformed. So then I get the transformation process, because I got the call, I have the revelation. Now I need the transformation of character and everything else to prepare me to use it. So I have to be willing to surrender and submit to the chamber. It's like Esther having all the oils and the stuff. There's levels and levels of that. Yes, there's a personal level in terms of our own life, in terms of our own physical body and health and wholeness, but actually it's way beyond that, level upon level upon level, where we then are prepared for the revelation that we brought out of darkness into light, and then we get to consummate it. We become one spirit with God in it, and then we start to operate in it. And that cycle continues if we're obedient and mature. It's not just a one-off cycle. It's a pattern of how these things work. 3, 4, window. The first 3 bring the government of it, and then the window opens, and then the consummation happens, and you begin to go through it. So.
Do I have time to throw another one out there?
Go on then.
So I looked at the house of discovery. How do you get in there?
Yeah. Because everything is essentially based on the same patterns that God has established in his precepts, statutes, and laws. They operate in different dimensions, but they're the basic patterns God has created. And once we engage them, then, as you say, that they begin to release the power, authority, everything. So it's yeah, it's interesting stuff. Yeah.
That's amazing. Wish I would have paid attention if I volunteered.
Yeah, I tell you what, it wouldn't give you much more benefit because you try and figure it out and understand it from a natural perspective, and we can't. It's we need to engage revelation of it that is functional to enable legislation, not just informational that we could describe it, but we don't use it. I'd rather use something I don't understand than understand something I don't use. And it's my spirit that needs to engage these things, not my mind. And yes, I do have a scientific mind and whatever, but that I don't engage that in this stuff. I used to because it drew me to it, but I don't anymore. I don't. I allow my spirit to engage, and my spirit receives everything it needs, and then I can use it even if I don't understand it, because my spirit I start doing things that I didn't do before. And so, well, where did that come from? Well, it came from engaging in these things. I discovered things in the Discovery House that I don't know. They weren't cognitive discoveries, but they were spiritual revelation was released to me. And then that gets outworked when it needs to be outworked. And I find that all the time. And this happens at so many different places that I've gone to, the Firestone and all those things. It's like I've gone there and it's just been like, whoa, too much. And then I find myself changed by it. And I find myself doing things differently as a result of it. Because my spirit has received the revelation, which, because I'm in creative light, I then engage my soul with that creative light, and my soul then begins to come into alignment. Even though it doesn't have to be cognitive, my soul comes into agreement, and I'm integrated into it, if you like. It didn't used to be like that, but it's very much more like that now. But the whole purpose of it is for God's glory. I mean, it's for God's glory to bring everything back into his original purpose, which I've engaged in his heart, where you get the purity of God's desire and love. I mean, everything's love. It's all about love and the purity of that desire in what was. The more time we spend there, the more we're not influenced by how we see things through the filter of sin. Everything in this realm is filtered through sin, and we have to see things from a different perspective, which is why we have to go into what was. And then we see ourselves from that perspective, and we see God's purposes from that perspective, and we see what we're authorized and mandated to do from that perspective, our destiny from that perspective, and then we start to outwork it without having to understand it. Now that really challenges the soul, because there is a way that seems right unto a man. There's always a way that it comes through the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. It's always a way which is humanistic that our soul pursues until it's dead. But once it's in alignment with the spirit, we don't need that. I don't need to know anymore. And that is very liberating. It's liberating for me, because I needed to know. It took me 4 months to die, to needing to know, but now I need to know I trust God. You know, and that is so released me into be able to do things without having to understand and know them. And that has multiplied my effectiveness in a sense, because I don't have to figure it all out, you know, which is great.
That's just the key word, and your suggestion of meditating and the pathway to go through transformation again is that
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, this will be an interesting broadcast.